In this lecture, we introduced Hinduism. Specifically, where did it come from? And we'll also talk a little bit about classical Hindu social structure. But first, a bit of geography. Here's the world we live in. Hinduism is the majority religion of this country, modern India, right over here. But let's back up a little bit and look at the bigger picture. This whole continent that India is at the bottom of is called Asia, and the boundaries of it are as follows. So this pink country here is Turkey. It's Europe over to the west of that. This little teeny green country here is Georgia, and that is considered within Asia. So is the whole country of Kazakhstan, this light green country here. And then the boundaries of Asia go roughly here along the Ural Mountains, a mountain range that's considered as separating Europe from Asia. So you can see that Russia is unusual in that it straddles two continents. The western part of modern Russia is in Europe, and the eastern part is in Asia. Another boundary of Asia is the upper right corner here of Africa, where Egypt ends. So basically all of this is Asia. Of course, Australia is a separate continent, and once you get way out here in the ocean, they consider that a different region. But everything in here is Asia. A lot more people live in Asia than live outside of Asia. There are a lot of high population countries there, including India, and especially China. Notice that India is a large country. It's larger than almost any country. It's just not as big as, say, the United States, Brazil, China, or Russia, but it still is very big. It also has a lot of people. In the present century, India is on course to catch up with and surpass China as the most populated country in the world. And that's one of many reasons why it's important to know something about Hinduism, as well as about India generally. Let's take a closer look. Here we are zoomed in then to a modern map of India, to the modern democracy of India. Also, we're kind of looking here at what people call South Asia. The interesting thing is that according to modern geology, this area used to be separate from the great bulk of Asia. People call this separate part the Indian subcontinent because it's kind of what used to be a separate piece of Asia. And the borders of it are the Himalayas, or the Himalayas, this great mountain range, which is about here. So you can put that on your own map. So millions of years ago, as the plates forming the crust of the Earth moved around due to geological forces, this Indian subcontinent slammed into the rest of what's now Asia. Which is why we have that big mountain range there. And to some extent, that mountain range has isolated India from the rest of Asia, although it has been invaded numerous times in history through some mountain passes roughly here by way of Afghanistan and what's now Pakistan. The Himalayas also keep out the colder northern air and trap the hot southern air, which produces monsoon rains in late summer and early fall, which makes a lot of India to be very fertile, capable of supporting a lot of life. Another thing to know is that modern India, which is in green here, is somewhat smaller than what you could say is historical India. So ethnically, culturally, linguistically, and religiously, the boundaries of Indian civilization go beyond what modern India is. We'll talk in a later lecture specifically about Pakistan and how that country came to be. That's an interesting modern story. So yeah, the cultural, historical boundaries of Indian civilization are roughly the same as the Indian subcontinent. So that's where we're talking about. This is the homeland of Hinduism. Let's talk a little bit then about names. India is the name of the modern state, and it was first used by the British when they ruled most of India in the 19th and 18th centuries. Indians today will also refer to their country as Bharat and Hindustan. As we just saw, the Indian subcontinent was a somewhat wider area. It would include all of modern India, but also Pakistan, some of Afghanistan, and the country of Bangladesh. The words Hindu and Hindi have historically been used of the people of India, whatever their religion. So historically, at some periods, the meaning of those terms is just Indians. But nowadays, Hindu tells you what religion someone is. It's like the word Christian or Muslim. And Hindi is a language. It's kind of the official language of modern India. Traditionally, it was more spoken in kind of a band across the middle and northern part of India. India, though, has many, many languages with millions of speakers. Nowadays, the word Hinduism names one of the big world religions. In fact, the third biggest in terms of numbers. Hinduism, I believe, was coined by a British scholar in the early 19th century, but it came into wide usage because this is what the British government called non-Muslim Indians. So anybody who wasn't a Muslim and who was a resident of India would be called a Hindu for government purposes. Here's what's interesting. Before these things happened at the hands of the British, there really wasn't a word for this religious tradition or traditions. So 1,000 years ago, the Indians were not going around calling these religious traditions Hinduism and thinking of them as a big world tradition competing with Christianity and Islam and so on. It was their traditional religion, but of course there was quite a bit of variability within it. There are many different cults, many different deities worshipped, many different traditions. Here's a comparison. Think back to your history class about the breakup of the Roman Empire, and you'll recall that the Roman Empire was successively invaded by a bunch of people that they called barbarians. There were a number of different tribes that became powerful, that is, peoples native to Europe, and they attacked the Roman Empire and took its territory over time, and eventually they captured Rome. Now imagine that these barbarian invaders had their own religion which they wanted to impose upon the Romans. And imagine that the Romans wanted to preserve their culture and preserve their religion. They might then just take all that traditional Roman religion, wrap it up, and label it Romanism, and argue, well, you might be Christians or Muslims or whatever, but we are Romanists. We adhere to Romanism, and Romanism is a greater and older religious tradition than what you guys have. That's basically what happened with Hinduism in the 19th century. The people of India rallied around this new term since the mid-1800s, and they've enthusiastically adopted this term as a description and a label for their own religious traditions. And they strongly assert that it's a great tradition and a peer of any other great religion that you could name. The British at the time didn't view it that way, with the possible exception of a few Indologists, a few scholars of religion and culture. The British generally regarded traditional Indian religion as just folk traditions, backward superstitions, paganism. In fact, this is what many Westerners thought throughout the 19th century, and not just religious people, but people generally in the West. Even though most Indians have embraced this term enthusiastically, there are some scholars that object to the term Hinduism. They say this makes it sound like it's really one religious tradition, and it's not. It's a whole collection of them, and they prefer the designation Hindu religious tradition. But for better or worse, we're stuck with the term. One might say that this term refers to a family of religions rather than to a single religion, because those 7 aspects of religion that we looked at last time do differ significantly between the different bodies or the different traditions, the different groups within Hinduism. Still, it's not quite good enough to say that Hinduism is just traditional Indian religion. That's not precise enough. Here's my own working definition of Hinduism. I would say that Hinduism is the religious traditions indigenous to the Indian subcontinent other than Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism. That's a definition of Hinduism that fits what you find in most Western textbooks. Most people probably working in religious studies outside of India would not object to this. Interestingly enough, this definition would be controversial in modern India. In 1955, the Indian Supreme Court, in a judgment relating to marriage laws, asserted that Jains, Buddhists, and Sikhs are Hindus. So I'll agree that Muslims are not Hindus and Christians are not Hindus. But as far as some Hindus are concerned, these groups that I've named here that are generally discussed as separate religions, as far as they're concerned, those are Hindus as well. Of course, most people in these 3 traditions, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism, most of them disagree, although not in all cases with the Jains. But most of them think that their religion is distinct from Hinduism, and it's just a different religion, which they prefer. American scholar Wendy Doniger, in an interesting and controversial book, writes, in what seems to me something like desperation, a number of people have defined Hinduism as the religion of people who cannot or will not define their religion. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan president of India from 1962 to 1967, defined Hinduism as the belief that truth is many-sided and different views contain different aspects of truth which no one could fully express, which would, Doniger comments, I think, make all Unitarian Universalists Hindus. So her objection to this suggested definition is that it's too broad. That definition would include people as Hindus who are clearly not Hindus, such as this modern sort of liberal progressive religious movement in the West, mostly in America. It might also include people who would call themselves postmodernists, would also possibly include some Jains and other people. So that doesn't seem like a good definition. I would prefer my definition. If anyone has a better definition of Hinduism, I'd like to see it. In any case, modern Hindus are open-minded in a certain way about different religions. In modern India, almost all Hindus are committed to some version of what philosophers call religious pluralism. Religious pluralism is not just the fact of religious diversity, which of course no one disputes. It's rather the evaluative claim that all, or maybe most, religions are in some way equal. And of course we have to get into the details of how exactly are they equal. Some Hindus would say that all religions are true. Some would say not that they're all true, but they all have aspects of the truth, or they're all ways to get in contact with God and things like that. In a philosophy class we can argue quite a bit about how religious pluralism is to be defined and whether or not it's true and why one should believe it or not. But on a practical level, most modern Hindus will say that other religions are just fine, all paths lead up the same mountain, and yet at the same time, clearly many of them think that Hinduism is superior. They consider it the oldest. Some Hindus consider other religions to really just be branches of Hinduism. It's like Hinduism is the trunk of the tree and all the other religions have branched out, but they're really all still part of that one tree. You'll see how much sense it makes to be a pluralist when you see how diverse the Hindu tradition is. But our next lecture we're going to turn briefly to ancient history and how that relates to the origins of Hinduism.